Welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast, your go-to source for personal, professional, and organizational growth and development. We hope you tune in often for all things people management, organizational development and change, organizational leadership, and social impact related. Maximize your personal and organizational potential with Human Capital Innovations Podcast. Welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast. In this HCI podcast episode, I share my recent guest visit on the Thought Leader Way podcast.
Welcome viewers to the second season of my knowledge series, The Thought Leader Way, where I bring together thought leaders from across the world, from various domains to share their perspectives and insights into what has made them a thought leader in their area. Today, my guest is Jonathan Westover. Welcome, Jonathan.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Yeah, real pleasure to have you. Jonathan is an award-winning Amazon #1 best-selling author. He's ranked #1 for HR innovation and future of global work for thought leadership in that space by Thinkers 360. He's an entrepreneur, management consultant, a teacher and research academic at Woodbury School of Business at Utah Valley University. He serves on a host of nonprofit, community and association boards and committees. He's also received numerous awards for his teaching, research, and service to the community. So, wow, Jonathan, you've really got your plate full, have wearing multiple hats. So it's a real pleasure to have you today on this show.
Thank you. Thank you. It really is a pleasure. I love having the opportunity to talk and share experiences with you and your listeners.
Wonderful. So, Jonathan, why do you think thought leadership matters now more than ever in this new normal or the altered world that we talk of?
Yeah, it's a really important question. And I suppose the motivations behind thought leadership and developing yourself into a thought leader probably vary depending on your role, your position, the industry you're in. For me, I'm a professor first and foremost.
Yeah.
So I conduct academic research. I teach courses at the university. And for years, I've been publishing academic research, and which has a really important role, to further the expansion of scientific knowledge in the areas that I focused on, which are leadership, workplace ethics, employee engagement, HR, organizational development and change, those sorts of topics. So I've done lots of academic research in those areas. And the problem with academic research, though, while it's important, is that it's a very limited audience for that research. And so you spend hundreds of hours, sometimes thousands of hours working on a research project, writing up the results, getting it published in an academic journal. And then there's really only even for the most impactful research articles, it's a relatively small number of people that are actually going to read that and use it in some meaningful way. And because all of my research is so application oriented anyways, like how do we make the workplace better? Several years back, it shouldn't have been difficult, but it was a bit of an aha moment for me that I came to this realization that, wait a minute, I need to do more to translate my academic research to more of a practitioner audience in more digestible snippets and chunks that people can use so that we can actually make organizations better and improve the lives of leaders and the people in their teams, that we can start making those improvements today. So for me, that's what motivated me to get into this thought leadership space. I was already heavily into the academic research space, lots of fellowships and awards and things like that. So I demonstrated that expertise and those credentials already. But what I hadn't done is really fully put myself out there into the practitioner space to engage with a much more broad audience. Now that's my motivation. I wanted to reach more people. For others who are already in the industry space, who are practitioners day in and day out, I think so much of it's about personal branding as well as organizational branding, drawing attention to what your organization can do for your customers, for the broader business community at large. There is so much noise out there in the world, so much information, a glut of information. We're not running up short on content. And so it can be scary to get into the practitioner thought leadership space, because you're one of thousands of people that are providing similar types of content into that space. And so that's why we'll get into it more later, I'm sure, with additional questions, but why you find your niche, why you focus in on specific areas that you have expertise in. But over time, you do, as you put out regularly, systematically over time, you will start to gain a following. You'll start to see the impact of your work, and it's incredibly rewarding to know that something I wrote, or a presentation I made, or a podcast episode I put out there, actually made a difference in the life of one or more people. Right. So I guess that's what gets me up in the morning, and what made me really invested in, prioritizing this and putting more of my time into the thought leadership space.
That's really nice. That's really nice. So you mentioned that you had an aha moment where you said, listen, I am in the academic space, so how do I get more into the practitioner thought leadership space? And you also rightly mentioned that there are too many people there and there is so much content out there. So what is your thought leader way? Because you've now been recognized in the Thinkers 360 as the B2B thought leaders to watch out for, right? So you've cracked the formula, right? So would you like to share what your thought leader way is?
Yeah, well, I'll say this is my way, right? It's not the way. And I think it was really just being consistent. I started to dabble even 5 years ago in doing more thought leadership stuff, doing work with think tanks, some of those types of things, doing policy oriented articles in relation to my research. But even policy related reports and articles doesn't reach as many people, as like 1,000-word, shorter practitioner oriented article. And so that was my first kind of step into that space, and I really liked it. I really felt like it was meaningful, and so I started to step further and further into that space. And then really, I'd done quite a bit before the pandemic, but this last February, March, as we started to really get hammered by the pandemic and lockdowns are happening and people are really worried, I made the decision that I would reinvest and commit my time towards thought leadership. And I started working. I spent time every day. I spent a good chunk of time in reaching out to professionals and doing interviews, producing podcast episodes, writing for outlets, like Forbes or various HR.com magazines, US News, various outlets, right? I just started every day. I had things to say, and I had things that I thought were important within the context of the pandemic. And because of that, I made sure that I committed time every day as part of my routine to getting my thoughts out there, whether it was verbally, in a podcast or a webinar format or in a written format. And before I knew it, I was actually kind of surprised as the months went by, the amount of content I had created and kind of the consistency in my branding. I started to develop, a followership, and the content was valued. And then, I became aware of places like Thinkers 360, and I had just published a book, and everything started to line up. And at that point, I realized this really is working out. And have I cracked the code completely? Do I have it all figured out? No. And to be honest, I'm still only a year or so into heavily being in the thought leadership space.
Right.
But the consistency and the commitment to it, I've produced hundreds of practitioner articles that have shown up in major publications. I've published now 400 plus podcast episodes,
Wow.
several hundred webinars, like just the consistency in putting value out there, like content that people need and want and can utilize. If you're doing that consistently, you will start to make a difference.
So it's being committed, being consistent, and creating value based content. So that's
Absolutely
the real differentiator. So Jonathan, you've done the work in a lot of spaces, right? So you're an entrepreneur, you're a management consultant, you're into academics. So how do you manage to showcase thought leadership across these areas, or do you choose to pick one area and go deep into that? So what do you think is your way?
What I've found is each of these areas are really complementary. So, my consulting work that I do in conjunction with, my entrepreneurial endeavor, my consulting firm, that provides a great avenue because I, at a minimum, I can always put up content on my consulting website. I have a very robust set of offerings on my website in terms of, short practitioner articles, blog posts, research briefs, research snapshots, the books that we've put out, webinars, podcasts, all of those things, right? All of it's hosted on the website. So that's a great way to brand the thought leadership and to drive business, towards the consulting work.
Okay.
But on the other hand, I would say everything that I've done in terms of the practitioner oriented thought leadership has spun out of my research. So for a decade and a half, I've been doing research in this space, and only really until this last year or so, had I really in this last year, had I really started putting in the work to break the really dense academic research into smaller chunks of usable information and practical information that people can use to improve their leadership approach, their team dynamics, their organizational effectiveness, etc. And so everything on my website in terms of thought leadership is connected and linked back to my original research. And then I also, have a lot of opportunity then to then put that into other outlets like Forbes articles or whatever, and then link back to those and put those on my website too. So the entrepreneurial effort in the consulting firm becomes the hub for the thought leadership to drive more clients and work towards the consulting. And it's an outcropping of the research that I've done. Now I understand a lot of people listening or watching this may not, be in the academic space the same way I've been. But you can do this basically the same thing as you tap into your existing areas of expertise. You don't have to reinvent the wheel, learn something new. Look at what you're already doing, where you already have expertise, where you've already been doing lots of great work, and figure out how can you start to translate that into meaningful value-added content that will be beneficial to others out there. And then find a place to host it, and then you're off and running.
Okay. So getting into some of the research that you've done, right? So you focus on leadership, you focus on organizations and future of work. So basis your research, what are some top 3 trends that you foresee with respect to future of workplaces?
Yeah, this has been something I've spent a lot of time working on, and for a really long time, I was basically looking at the past into the present. Looking back over the last 50 years in particular, and looking at the trends and the shifts in economic composition and the dynamics around the workplace and the nature of work and how that shifted, and the experience of employees in the workplace and how that shifted over the last 50 years or so. And then that gets us to where we are today. Around 5 years or so ago, I decided it's time, because we see so many of these trends from the past are continuing a trajectory into the future. And because of what we're seeing and the amount of disruption, that it's time to start focusing a little bit more on not just the past and the present of work, but the future of work. And we don't have a crystal ball. I can't do research on the future of work, in the same way that I do research on the current conditions or the past. But I can look at the trends and the trajectories, and I can talk to experts and conduct interviews about what other people view as these likely trends and future conditions in the workplace. And so that's what I focused a lot of time on over the last several years. I'm excited to announce the publication of my new book from HCI Press, The Alchemy of Truly Remarkable Leadership: Ordinary, Everyday Actions that Produce Extraordinary Results. Consider how the nature of work has shifted over the past 50 years. With increased globalization, rapid technological advancement, and the shift in economic composition, the average job of today looks very different than the average job of 50 years ago. What will the jobs and organizations of tomorrow look like? Moreover, what does this all mean for organizational leaders? What are the core competencies and capabilities of organizations and their leadership that are prepared for continued disruption and geopolitical and socioeconomic shifts? Regardless of what the future holds, increasingly, leaders need to be socially minded, data-driven, decisive, champions of talent, and disruptors of the traditional notions of leadership, teams, organizations, and work. The Alchemy of Truly Remarkable Leadership will help you to explore your own leadership competencies and capabilities and consider ways to apply and implement them into your workplace and personal life. As we were getting into this pandemic, I actually wrote a thought piece back in the middle to late March last year. So right after all the lockdowns started to happen. And at the time I was making the argument that the pandemic was going to be an accelerator and a catalyst to push us towards the already, approaching and emerging future of work. That everything that people had been predicting might be happening in the next 10, 20 years, this pandemic is speeding up that process and pushing us into it much faster. And at the time, I hadn't seen anyone else really talking about that. I think people were just so struck by the moment and trying to hustle to move to remote work and figure out how they're going to keep their business afloat. But since then, of course, that idea has really caught hold. And now most people are talking about the pandemic and how it's acting as an accelerator and a catalyst towards the future of work. And here's why. And it is true. That is absolutely happening. And here's why. The technological disruptions are probably factor number one. So when you're asking what are like the three trends moving us into the future, technological disruption has been there. We're in the middle of the fourth industrial revolution. We've been seeing these shifts for a long time. But the adoption of the existing technologies has been slow. So there have been people on the bleeding edge adopting and leveraging these new technologies, AI, and machine learning, various virtual work technologies and platforms, all these sorts of things. What the pandemic did, though, is it forced people who were slow adopters to adopt overnight, right? Because all of a sudden they had no choice. Sure. They either had to adopt and adapt, or they were going to die and their company was going to go out of business. And so certainly there were a lot of people fumbling around, people not knowing how to do it, but essentially everyone almost overnight had to make that shift and move into embracing these technologies. And it's actually quite tremendous to see the amount of change in the distance we've come in 1 year's time. I think, easily that could have taken us 5+ years to get to this point, maybe more. Had we not had this kind of a catalyst. Now, obviously there's lots of hard things around the pandemic, but in that sense, it's been a really good thing because it's forced people to start to think through these questions and adopt and adapt and embrace these technologies. So technological disruption, I think, is number one. In relation to that, then, is the increasingly interconnected global workforce, and how that's facilitated through virtual work and work from home arrangements. And even many organizations, once we're kind of past the pandemic, many organizations are talking about bringing their people back to the workplace, or at least in some hybrid fashion. But, the pendulum has swung so far towards virtual work, I don't think we're ever going back as far the other direction as we were before. And so organizations are going to continue to have to look at how to effectively embrace and utilize a global virtual workforce, which has challenges for sure, but also provides a lot of opportunities. And think about a global labor market where you're struggling to get skilled workers with the technical expertise in your specific whatever area it happens to be. No longer are we stuck with just battling out and competing for talent in our own geographical location. Now, that was true before the pandemic, but most organizations still wanted people there physically, and they still wanted people at the office, and they still primarily hired from their geographical location. I think those assumptions have been disrupted, and people's comfort level with the virtual work has increased so much that now we truly are starting to embrace this idea of having a virtual team where you have the best talent from anywhere. And it doesn't matter if I'm in the US, the UK, India, Singapore, whatever, we can have people from all those places. And the only constraint is the time difference, really. And so that's a tremendous opportunity, but it will be reshaping how we work and how we collaborate. And that's something that we're going to have to continue to look at. I think maybe there's several more we could probably talk about, but in addition to technological disruption, in addition to virtual work, breaking down geographical barriers and working virtually on a global scale, we also see the rise of the gig economy and the role of the contingent workforce and contract employees. Again, this isn't new. We've been seeing this trend for the last couple of decades, and gig economies and informal economies have existed throughout the history of mankind.
but now they're getting more mainstream.
Exactly. Now, especially over the last decade, they've been getting more and more mainstream. And as we've come into this pandemic moment, even more so. So now companies are realizing, wow, we're really struggling, to make payroll. The formal employee-employer relationship has constraints around it. So, but if we're embracing this global virtual workforce, that another next step to that is the gig workers. Like I can have part-time or full-time employees that are more formal employees within the organizations around all the core key functions of the organization, but there are so many tangential things that aren't at the core of what the organization is trying to do. And to develop in-house or hire a full-time person to come and do that thing, which maybe you don't have to do all the time, that's so much more expensive and inflexible than just getting gig workers to provide their expertise and do great work at a reasonable price. And so I think that element, and really all three of those that I just mentioned are very connected, right?
Very connected.
None of them happen without the technological disruption. But ultimately, all three of those areas are reshaping the nature of the employer-employee relationship, the nature of how we define work, what work even looks like, what the expectations are between employer and employee. So for example, employers, they like the gig economy and gig workers because it provides them with flexibility, and it's a cost-effective approach to, getting the expertise they need, and they can get it from anywhere, right? So that's wonderful for employers and organizations. But more and more, particularly younger workers, are preferring gig work. They on the employee side, they really like doing that kind of work, because it also provides them with the flexibility, the autonomy, the ability for them to be their own boss, essentially, and the rise of this condition of like the digital nomad, of people just living anywhere, and they have their skill set, and they can get connected with organizations across the globe, and it doesn't matter where they are as long as they have a good internet connection. So I think all of those elements combined, and there's more we could talk about, but those are some of the main ones that are essentially going to reshape our very conception of the nature of work, and start to reshape professions and jobs and the types of tasks that we do at work. It's already been happening. It's going to continue into the future.
So with this background, what do you think will be the impact on leadership? Because a lot of leaders may not be equipped with these kind of changes and at such rapid pace. So what are some pointers or advice that you would like to give for leaders who would be managing this remote, global, virtual, gig economy, Gen Z workforce, all that coming in a digital workplace?
Yeah, I mean, the bottom line is it's going to be challenging, and it's going to be different than perhaps what they've experienced in the past. And so the name of the game is agility and flexibility. As an organizational leader, I have to be thinking about what I'm doing, not just based on what I saw people do in the past, and I have to challenge my assumptions about what I think good leadership looks like. And some of the things that I may have done in the past that were effective may not work anymore. When I'm managing and leading a global virtual team of gig workers, for example. And so we have to think about all of the traditional pieces of effective leadership. We have to continue to do, but we have to challenge our preconceived notions and assumptions. And we have to continually be experimenting with what's going to be most effective in this new kind of a context. So, in my relatively limited experience myself in working with virtual teams, in comparison to others who have been in virtual companies for a really long time, I'm like many others. Like I'd done plenty of virtual collaborations and had international teams in the past, but it wasn't until this past year where I really was fully involved in that kind of a setting. And what I've noticed is that absolutely the same principles that led to effective leadership in the past still tend to matter now, but the application's a little bit different. And I have to, frankly, I have to be more deliberate in my communication with my people when I have a virtual team, where we never see each other in person. Before it might have been, we were virtual sometimes, we were in person sometimes, but when you think about organizational culture, and you think about team building and dynamics, and you think about employee engagement and motivation, and some of these factors, they're still important. It's just you're going to be doing them a little bit differently now. And so I have to be very proactive, very deliberate about making sure that I am proactively connecting with my people and reaching out to them and making sure that they feel supported, seen, heard, valued, all of those sorts of things. And if I'm not proactive and deliberate about that, then it just doesn't happen. It doesn't happen organically like it could have happened in the past when we were in a physical work environment together, where I could just pop by and talk to someone by their office, or we ran into each other in the hallway or by the elevator or whatever. None of that's happening anymore when we're virtual. And so being self-reflective, being willing to challenge your assumptions, being willing to experiment and innovate in your own leadership practice. I think that's the mindset that leaders today need to adopt. Otherwise, if we're too stuck in the old ways of even what may have been very effective in the past, that doesn't always translate into the future.
True. So my last question, Jonathan, is for budding people out there who want to become thought leaders. What's the advice that you have for them?
Yeah, get started. Don't wait. For a long time, I thought about doing a podcast myself. And I mean, for years, I consume podcasts. I've been a faithful listener of some of my favorite podcasts for over a decade or more. And I always thought, hey, that would be cool. I should do that. I have things I could say and people I can talk to. And I always came up with reasons and excuses for not doing it. And then I finally just bit the bullet and just decided to dive in and to do it. And it was a little bit scary. I didn't quite know what I was doing. There was a lot of experimentation and some trial and error, in the beginning and a learning curve for sure. But pretty quickly I got into a groove and I got into, I mastered the technology needed to be, utilized. I fine-tuned some approaches in my technique, and pretty soon, I was in a place where I could very efficiently produce great content, and it was meaningful to me, invigorating for me to do it. I had the opportunity to talk, I continue to have the opportunity to talk to so many fascinating, interesting people from around the world. And all of that is just because I finally decided to just do it. It doesn't need to be it doesn't need to be perfect. Certainly if you go back, I'm now in season 15 of my podcast. I've published, 420 episodes or something. And they're better now than they were at the beginning. If you go back to like season 1, at times it's a little cringy just in terms of how I'm fumbling or the sound quality or those things. But it was still good. It was good enough. And I learned as I went. So don't let your desire for, quality and perfection be the enemy of progress, right? Just get started, get going, get moving. Same thing with writing, or being involved in webinars or things like that. You have expertise. Think about how you can share that, and whether it's verbally, podcast, video, whether it's written in a book or in practitioner articles or whatever. Just get started, try it out, experiment, and then be consistent. And if you do that, before you know it, you'll have a body of work that starts to speak for itself, and then people start to reach out to you to share. So then it's not just you trying to convince other people you're worth listening to. Now people are actually reaching out to you and asking you to contribute, and your influence will spread.
Great. So it was wonderful talking to you, Jonathan. Thanks for all those perspectives, practical tips for people who want to become thought leaders out there, and some very interesting perspectives with respect to future of work and leadership. So hopefully once the pandemic is through and travel restrictions are all eased up, would definitely love to meet you in person when I'm in the US. So really nice talking to you once again, and look forward to collaborating in future as well.
Yes, thank you. And I would love to see you as well. I love traveling around the world, and perhaps we'll have that opportunity sometime in the near future.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. We are excited about the launch of HCI's new magazine, Human Capital Leadership. Human Capital Leadership is a free, interactive e-magazine designed to help individuals,
leaders, and organizations find innovative approaches to maximize their human capital potential. We will be publishing issues quarterly in August, November, February, and May. Check out the first issue and let us know what you think. Thanks again for joining us for this episode of the Human Capital Innovations Podcast. I hope you stay healthy and safe and that you have a great week.